Welcome back to Out of the Fold. This episode is the conclusion of my conversation with Neil. If you haven't listened to the first part, please do so before listening to this one. No church groups, companies, or individuals were contacted for comment about any of the content of this episode. The opinions expressed are strictly those of the ones expressing them. You know, what it reminds me of is like if there's somebody that you're attracted to and you might do things to like attract that specific type of person, like you wear a certain type of clothing, or you find out what type of music they listen to so that you can at least talk to them about that type of music. What this sounds like is that it's not even people that are really big on God. They're just big on like getting with a certain type of person, and like that evangelicalism is just the clothing that they need to wear to like get the girl that they actually want, like that kind of thing.
Absolutely. That's absolutely a perfect explanation of it. And actually, you know, as I watched kind of the ascendance of Donald Trump, I saw it all over again. I was like, you know, everyone else is shocked that evangelicals support Donald Trump by these massive margins. And I was like, okay, you've obviously not been around evangelicals for more than 5 minutes.
Right.
There's not as much moral compulsion involved as people think there is. You are born into evangelicalism or you're not. And if you're not, then it's going to be very difficult to understand what evangelicals as kind of a part of society are doing.
Right.
There's a guy I know who I met at that first Christian college who he's named after a Civil War general, so that should give you an idea of what his family's like.
Lovely.
And he's actually related to that general, so at least it's not like totally weird.
Right.
But he also came from a very, very staunch fundamentalist background, charismatic, and so we had a lot of connections, and it's been very interesting for us. He's recently deconverted himself, and it's been very interesting to kind of, you know, talk about our experiences and how different they were, but at the same time how similar they were. Mm-hmm. and you know, kind of, sometimes it feels like, you know, us and a few 100,000 other people do understand what's going on when it comes to evangelicals and how they kind of interact with society at large.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, sometimes it's hard not to laugh kind of at the news media and how they portray evangelicalism as these, you know, high and mighty wannabe moralists. I was just like, yeah, wannabe maybe, but that's not what their actions say.
Right.
And it never has been what their actions say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always been this way.
Right.
Realizing now that evangelicalism's always been like this. It's not like this is a new thing. It's always been like this. It's just kind of like, you know, it's sometimes it can be hard to take seriously reading in the news about what the evangelicals are saying about Donald Trump today. Like, you know, none of this is surprising. This is only surprising because you're not from that world.
Right. Yeah. And you've probably heard, if you've listened to the episodes that I put up so far, like I've always wondered about it. Like I've wondered ever since, because I've known evangelicals before, and the high school that I went to was Lutheran, but it was a lot more evangelical than anybody on the outside realized that it was. And I was kind of shocked to find out about, you know, 3 years after I left, that people were having sex while I was there, you know, and these were students that totally, you know, were judgmental towards me for being like a, you know, at the time I was a little goth kid, you know, so people made fun of me for the way that I dressed and thought that I was worshiping Satan, and turns out that they were doing all the stuff that I was doing outside of school as well. So you actually just answered a question that I've been asking everybody about why there is so much support for Donald Trump in the evangelical community, but it's really just my misunderstanding about the fact that it's not about morality. it's just a club.
Right. And Donald Trump says the right things to be in the club.
Yeah.
And so he's in the club. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares that he's, never been to church?
Mm-hmm.
Who cares he can't recite the Apostles' Creed? Who cares that he's got a framed Playboy issue in his office that Jerry Falwell Jr. stood right in front of? It doesn't matter because he says the right thing. It doesn't matter that, he has all these affairs with Playboy models and porn stars.
Mm-hmm.
It's irrelevant. It's not important. He says nice things about Christians, and he says nice things about things that evangelicals care about. So everything else is immaterial. And it actually, it's kind of funny. Talking to this friend of mine, I've used the phrase, or I've used the word nihilism a lot in connection with the evangelicals. And I'm like, really, it's kind of funny because I was raised the whole time. Nihilism was a 4-letter word in our household. I was like, it's really funny, though, because if you think about it, evangelicals are some of the most nihilistic people in America. Nothing matters. Nothing. Yeah. There's no objective basis for anything. You just say there is, and then it's almost as if it becomes real. But is it really?
Yeah.
There's no grounding for any of it. It's all just you're either born the right way or you say the right things and join the club that way. After the fact. But there's nothing real behind all of it. When you realize that evangelical is a big facade and it's all just window dressing for your life, it really changes the way that you start to perceive what evangelicalism as a movement is doing and how it functions within the American cultural zeitgeist. Because none of it's real. It's all imaginary. It's all driven by same things as every other group in America. There's nothing different about it.
I mean, there are people that identify themselves as being deeply Christian, whether they say that they're evangelical or not. I mean, people in the purity movement, for example. I mean, that doesn't seem like a club of people that are just saying something for the sake of saying it. I mean, they'll never talk to their daughter again if she has premarital sex. I mean, that seems like it's a slightly different thing.
Well, it's funny because, evangelicalism is now trying to root out the purity movement on some level. And they're doing it for the right reasons, don't get me wrong. But it's hard to look at that from my perspective and be like, oh, yeah, this is all totally honest and forthright. Because it's like, what's the real motivation? Like, for the most part, the outward claims motivation is pretty honest and pretty good. But is that really what it's about, or is it about this notion that, hey, we can't really keep up this facade anymore when all of our kids are out having sex in the parking lots of their Christian colleges? Because there are harmful messages from purity culture. I mean, I was part of purity culture just as much as I was evangelical culture.
Yeah.
But when you know what's really going on, and you realize that on some level, the parents have to be aware of what's going on. And now, those first-generation true love waits types are parents of college-age kids. And they're starting to realize, oh, my God, I didn't follow any of this stuff. There's no way my kids are following it, too. It's just not a realistic assumption.
Right.
And so they're just kind of like, why are we still doing this?
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, there are things worse than hypocrisy. In the purity movement. I mean, the methods that we have of sex education and things like that, where it's so much more about shame and guilt and fear than it is about facts. I mean, that to me is worse than even if they are true to their beliefs and they actually do hold those beliefs and they do that. I mean, there's no hypocrisy there, but that to me sounds worse than even calling yourself evangelical and then doing something different from that behind closed doors.
Right. And I mean, you know, the purity culture aspect of it, that I don't know if that necessarily played a role in my own deconversion or not, but I do know that purity culture had negative effects on me. Some of them are more insidious than others, but I will have to say, you know, I did finally become sexually active about, what's the timeline on that? Probably about 2.5 years. 2.5 years after I finally had my moment of deconversion.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a good idea to wait that long, I have to admit, because when I actually did have sex for the first time, I kind of had this moment of clarity midway through, and I was like, you know, what's the big deal with all this anyway? Then right after that, I thought, oh my God, if I'd done this 2 years ago, I would not nearly have so much of a healthy response.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe the difference between being an atheist and being something like an anti-theist. You know, somebody who can look back on that time and think, you know, I'm kind of thankful for the fact that I didn't have sex until I was in my early 20s in your case. And maybe you didn't like the way that they taught it, but you know that if you had done it earlier, it would have been worse than if you had waited. So it's like, you know, you don't believe it anymore, but to some degree you're thankful for it, for the fact that maybe if you had learned something different, then it would have happened differently.
I think it is actually worth kind of going into some details about it, just because of the people involved. So there was this girl, and I met her at the Second Christian College, and the way we met was not a good sign if we were going to end up having sex later.
Mm-hmm.
She was suicidal,
yeah.
and needless to say, didn't go through with it. But I kind of was just sort of trying to be a decent person to her, is really the best way I can put it. Because from my perspective, I saw someone who was struggling with issues of being in a fundamentalist environment, and someone whose personality was just not compatible with. Just from the short conversations that I had with her, I realized, you know, she's this kind of free spirit type, and being in a fundamentalist culture and being kind of free spirited and wild like that, it doesn't work.
Right.
I've seen it before. It's like I've seen it before. This is not the last time I'll see it. And I didn't go in with the express purpose of trying to date her, trying to deconvert her, or any of the things that actually happened. But they happened anyway. And sometimes that's just how life is.
Yeah.
We grew a lot closer over the ensuing months, and things got pretty whirlwindy in December of 2016 when I was over in Indonesia, and we were just kind of, you know, talking over text message. And yeah, there was also kind of a mutual understanding, and it was explicitly stated that we were going to have sex at some point. Right. It was very weird, but at the same time kind of refreshing to have this kind of connection with someone, and for both people to just be like, yeah, that's what's going to happen, and there not be, you know, dancing around it, or, you know, a will they, won't they kind of thing going on. Just like yeah, it's going to happen, and, you know, it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
So then that February, Valentine's Day was coming up, and we were both single, and she basically was like, so I don't have anyone to go with for Valentine's Day, so you want to, like, go on a date or something? And I was like, all right, I guess. So we did. We went on a date, and I lost my virginity on Valentine's Day. And it was incredibly awkward because her period started that morning.
Good Lord.
But we just powered through it. My first sexual experience was the most awkward and the most horrible it possibly could have been, and nobody's feelings got hurt. So I'd say that's a success. But yeah, so her dad is a staff member at university. So that's its own can of worms.
Did you tell your parents that this happened, or did they know that you were starting to?
Oh, no. Goodness, no. I mean, if hell exists, then, you know, that pretty much, that whole relationship punched me a one-way ticket, but I'm not about to tell my parents that.
Right. Do your parents know that you now identify as atheist?
No, I've kept it kind of under wraps. I thought, at least. My mom has said some things in recent months that make me wonder if there's at least some suspicions. Just some idle comments, some idle jokes where I'm just like, that's very weird to say if you think I'm still a Christian.
So, I mean, do you lie to them when they ask you about, you know, things that you're doing that are Christianity related, or do you guys just sort of not talk about it? Is it like an avoided subject?
Well, kind of weirdly, it's pretty much always been sort of an avoided subject. I do kind of recharacterize what I'm doing in my spare time, because I do actually still study the Bible occasionally.
Sure, yeah.
As kind of an academic thing, and so I do talk about the fact that I study the Bible with them. I don't tell them I'm doing it to, you know, learn the reality behind the Bible and not the fictional presentation that it gives of itself.
Right.
But I do tell them that I'm studying the Bible in some capacity, and that tends to get them off my back for the most part.
Do you study the Bible just for your own personal growth, or do you have a job that benefits from you doing so?
No, I do it for myself. My what I do for a living full time has really nothing to do with the Bible.
Gotcha.
But the good thing is, you know, if it were to come out that I was an atheist at work, there wouldn't really be any repercussions for it. My boss is very open about the fact he's not religious himself. So, which is very strange for an older guy living in rural South Carolina. Never would have thought that would happen, but yeah, he makes no bones about the fact that he hasn't been to church in like 25 years, and he doesn't care.
So I'd also imagine that if you were raised in this, you know, you were raised evangelical, and you did the missions, and you probably means that you were baptized, you went through all of these different things and educated deeply into what accepting the Holy Spirit and educated deeply into what all that means, and you would have to be ministering to other people, so you would have to be somewhat of a scholar on it from a very young age. I'd imagine that there wouldn't just be a couple of experiences that would one day, you're sitting down and you say, okay, I'm an atheist. Like I'd assume that it wouldn't just sort of happen like that. Like, did you kind of go through a process after some of these experiences that you had that, like, did you start off saying, I don't know what I believe, so I guess I'm agnostic, and then that led to atheism, or what was your process of fully renouncing?
So it started in 2014. I was about 23 years old. The last 6 months, from a couple weeks before my birthday up until August of that year, was kind of the last stage. I went to church. The last time I went to church before I left religion completely, it was a Baptist church here in South Carolina, and I went because one of my suite mates was going. Mm-hmm. So I was just like, what the heck? I went, and wouldn't you know it, the topic of the sermon that day was abortion and talking about people to go vote for. And I was like, this is really weird. We don't have an election here for 10 more months. So what gives? And I kind of came away from the experience, and I vocalized this to the people I was with. I was just like, the whole thing just kind of put me off. Like, don't we need to be, caring about bigger and better things than abortion?
Right.
And I was like, I'm not trying to, I had to kind of backpedal a little bit. I was like, I'm not trying to devalue abortion. I'm not trying to devalue the taking of human life. I'm just saying, aren't there bigger fish to fry right now?
Right.
And it didn't really seem to go through very, very much. So I just kind of gave up on the whole line of questioning and let it be an awkward car ride back to school. But, it kind of weighed heavily on me. And I'm sitting there thinking, no one around me really seems to care about, like, anything that isn't a pet issue for evangelicals. And on top of that, I was struggling with, the fact that I'm 23. I've, never had more than a couple of friends around me at any given point in time. I've never really done any dating. I've never done anything that a normal person my age is doing or has done.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of just that general social rejection, a general disconnect, I think, in the way that I was kind of trying to look at the world and the way that everyone around me was looking at the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, this is just not working out for me. There's got to be something else out there. And the moment came in August. It was my last night in the dorms for the summer session. And I'm sitting there, and one of my Christian friends has shared this video, laughing at young earth creationist arguments. And I've been out of the young earth creationist belief system for years at this point. I mean, I had already gone well past the point of, wow, evolution being real really has no impact on whether or not the Bible's real. I mean,
mm-hmm.
come on. And I was watching the video. I'll go ahead and mention who the channel was. It was Armored Skeptic. I remember this clearly. And I watched some of his evolution videos, and then I started getting into some of the God arguments videos, the theism argument videos. And he was, kind of doing these edited back and forths with these other YouTubers who had done videos, defending theism and all that. And it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning when I finally just took a break, and I was like, wow, I don't think I believe in God anymore. Because I've got nothing for this. I mean, I have no argument. I have nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I have no emotional reason for maintaining this. I have no logical reason for maintaining this belief. Like, why am I wasting my time, tormenting myself,
right,
and depriving myself of perfectly normal experiences for something I can't even logically defend on the most basic level? So about 5 o'clock in the morning, in late August of 2014, that was when I came to the realization. I was like, oh my God, I don't believe in God anymore. And I don't know how long I haven't believed in God. Because there was also the moment where I was just like, if it was that simple, I watched 2 hours of YouTube videos and became an atheist. Was I really a Christian at that point? Or had it happened sooner? And I just didn't realize it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird thing to think about.
I think about that kind of thing a lot too. Like, things like fantasy novels and fantasy movies like, Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings are sometimes sort of shunned in Christian communities.
Oh yeah, Harry Potter was 100% off limits.
Yeah, and to me that always seemed odd, even when I called myself a Christian. It's like, if your belief could be swayed so easily by Harry Potter, how strong is the teaching to begin with?
And what's ridiculous to me is that Harry Potter was originally written as an allegory.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, well, if an allegory for a biblical story is not okay, then it's like, oh, if I read the Bible, I'm going to become an atheist. I'm like,
right.
Well, then what's the point of becoming a Christian?
Yeah.
If you can't read the Bible without losing your faith, then you got some real problems.
Yeah. So what does it mean to you today? When you're talking to somebody and the fact that they're a Christian comes up? Like, does it mean anything to you anymore?
Yeah, it really doesn't mean anything unless I know more about them.
Right.
You know, more about what Christianity means to them.
Right.
Because if I don't know what Christianity means to you, then the word Christian is just very amorphous, and it doesn't really mean much. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight to it. Growing up, I was definitely raised in a household that was, you know, all about Republicans. And you know, I remember in 2008, I was very much about McCain, Palin, mostly the Palin, less the McCain, and you know, thinking that made me, you know, so brilliant and intellectual and all of this. But I had read President Obama's biography, The Audacity of Hope, and I came away from that thinking, you know, maybe things are a little bit more nuanced than I've been raised to believe. And that kind of set me on a little bit of self-discovery, especially when I actually moved back to the States and was talking to people, you know, just on a regular basis, people who had different political beliefs from my own. And living in Georgia, this is going to happen to you. It's just how it is. I did go through like this total, you know, libertarian phase, but that's going to happen. I mean, it's Georgia. They hate government in Georgia. It's something very specific to Georgia. It has the only state with more counties than Georgia is Texas, but Georgia has like a third of the land of Texas. So that should give you a good sense for how much Georgia residents like centralization and centralized government. But you know, I've changed pretty dramatically even from that point. I don't think my deconversion has changed my politics that much per se. I think, but I am very different from where I was 10 years ago. Nowadays, I think I'm a person who tends to be a bit of a coin flipper when I vote. You know, I like civil rights a lot. It's just that the problem is, as it relates to something like Democrats, I also think gun ownership is a civil right. So that can kind of be a bit of a loggerheads for me at times. I mean, this year I voted in the Democratic primaries in my state. I voted pretty much a straight Democratic ticket wherever I could. And that's not too far off from what I did 2 years ago. Though I did vote in the Republican primaries under the vain hope that it was going to be an actual fair primary and that, you know, someone who actually had more than 40% support within the party was going to win. The positive thing for me, I guess, is a lot of Democrats in South Carolina, where I live, they are definitely more liberal than Republicans. But when it comes to things like, you know, gun ownership, they tend to be a lot more in line with what we would consider conservative. The guy that I voted for in our House race, I live in Trey Gowdy's district, so it was an open seat. And the guy I voted for was this businessman from Spartanburg. He's a Democrat, lifelong Democrat, and he's sitting there on his page on his website saying, "You have the right to own an AR-15," and a lot of people would be kind of surprised to read that on a Democrat candidate's issues page, but that's pretty normal here. And he was someone who I was like, you know, I don't have a problem with voting for this guy. He's a pretty decent guy, and I know he's going to get, you know, completely curb stomped, but I'd rather vote for the guy that, you know, I can sleep with myself at the end of the day. A guy who, you know, some people, of course, are naturally not going to like the fact that he thinks that it's okay to own a gun, but he's also okay with, you know, access to contraceptives and, you know, okay with gay people being treated as equals and all that kind of thing. So it's like, you know, I'm pretty okay with this. Yeah. For me, I looked at it as, you know, this is my kind of guy. And, you know, there were probably plenty of Democrats here in this district who maybe didn't feel the same way, but I was like, you know, this is a good guy. I like him. He's someone I can definitely support. it's kind of funny. There is one other thing I haven't talked about yet. And this was something that I felt like was very foreshadowed when I was listening to Claire's interview. The whole time as she's talking, especially when she started talking about anyone who was LGBT, I was like, oh boy, there's going to be a revelation toward the end, isn't there? The fact that she now lives as a bisexual woman, I was like, oh, yeah, saw that coming. Because it mirrored a lot of my own experiences. And I came to the realization about a year after I deconverted, I was like, yeah, I'm bisexual. I should probably just kind of admit that to myself. Mm-hmm. And when I looked back on my life, I was like, wow, this should have been a lot more obvious than it was. But it's very awkward for me because that, admitting to the fact that I'm an atheist is something that I can see myself being comfortable with talking to my parents about someday. The fact that I'm bisexual, not so much. Mm. And to me, it's something where I'm just like, I feel like I can hide that. Because I don't see myself, dating other men. So it's not even something where there's a likely chance of it coming up, Mm-hmm. So my attitude on it is just kind of like, well, I don't have to say anything, then I'm just not going to say anything. It's a lot easier that way.
Yeah.
My dad is extremely homophobic, and I understand why. He uses his religious beliefs as kind of a cover for it, because it's not the real reason that he's homophobic. My mom told me the real reason years ago, and then I was just kind of like, okay, I guess that makes sense. It's just, you can't really just use the sins of one person to justify hating everyone,
Yeah.
And it also kind of shed some light on an experience I had growing up where I was sexually assaulted and my dad was present and got me out of the situation, but I wouldn't talk about it at all. And that was pretty difficult for me to deal with for a very long time. I actually don't even know if my mom knows that it happened, because my dad is so tightly wrapped about that kind of thing, and would be so unwilling to talk about it. If he wouldn't talk about it with me, I'm not sure he would have talked about it with my mom. And it's just kind of something I've wondered about for a long time. Just because it's something where I feel like, probably both my parents should know that happened, not just one of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. They're actually flying in this weekend to Atlanta to stay for the holidays in Georgia. So I don't know. I might have to have that conversation with them at some point in the near future. But yeah, that's a little bit more of kind of the not explicitly irreligious past of mine. But it also, the experience naturally, it made me pretty violently homophobic for a while. But it was something that I just kind of got over. I met gay people, and they didn't do anything untoward or wrong or anything like that, and it changed my view pretty dramatically.
Yeah. Whew. You don't have to talk about that anymore if you don't want to. Can I just ask? Was the assault by a man?
Yeah. It was a man, total stranger. Never seen him before. I don't think I could pick him out if he was standing right in front of me right now.
Yeah.
May as well have been a ghost.
Right. Right.
So I'm sure that's at least part of that trauma response. I'm almost positive, but
right. Well, I can also understand that. It's like how if that happens, and then also you're being taught these Bible verses about homosexuality being a sin, I could see how those could easily culminate into homophobia.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that I know regarding my dad's homophobia was my great uncle on my dad's side was openly gay. and he was like, I think, the first or second person in the state of Florida to die of complications related to AIDS. And the doctor said he must have had contact with patient zero, because, I mean, it was so early. There was just no way it could have been anyone else.
Right.
He regularly visited Philadelphia for business. It was part of his job. He had to go up there pretty regularly. And obviously that's where patient zero had been most of the time, and probably had direct contact with him at some point.
Yeah, those would be nails in the coffin. I think it's unfortunate though, and you're exactly right. I mean, it doesn't justify hatred for an entire group of people, but it to somebody like that, it would be logical.
Right.
I've always I've never done anything with a man before, and I've never wanted to, but I've had gay friends, and my family grew up with gay people all around us. And I remember that there was and I talked about this with Claire as well, so I apologize, I'm repeating myself, but yeah, I mean, we would have these chapels where the entire time was the pastor literally yelling at everybody there, talking about how if you're gay, you're going to hell. And it reminded me of when you were talking about the abortion day at the church that one time. It's like, should we really be bothering with this? Like, if we're going to be doing something where we're trying to bring people into Christianity or doing something to improve the community, is this really where you want us to focus? Like, it just didn't make any sense to me. And then there's the morality of it after that. But at first, the initial thought that I had was this is a waste of time.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sitting there in one of the poorest cities in America, which, I mean, it's not really a city. I think there's like 10,000 people in this town, but it's one of the poorest places in America. I mean, we are talking Flint levels of poor.
Yeah.
And, we live 5 minutes from it. And I'm like, we can't think of anything that's like a little more important. Like, right in our backyard, literally right, you throw a rock over the fence,
yep,
and you're going to land in some of the problems
yep,
that we could be dealing with right now.
Yeah.
And we're going to get hung up on, abortion.
Right.
The logic of it for me was abortion, if we're going to treat abortion as a problem, it has to be a higher level problem. You can't just start running into the problem of abortion. You have to walk through the problems of things like, systemic poverty and the situations that lead to women wanting an abortion in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just skip a step.
Right.
You have to work your way up to that. And if we're going to treat abortion as a problem, then it's a multifaceted problem, and there's a lot of different things that go into it. You can't just start with abortion's bad, we have to get rid of it.
Yeah. If you treat abortion like a problem, like if you are actually going to say that abortion is the issue, then if you're trying to just eliminate abortion from the world of legality, then you're kind of just treating it like a symptom rather than a disease. Yeah,
exactly. And that is the same thing like with purity culture, and how they develop this notion that there's that you can be addicted to porn or addicted to sex. By that logic, yeah. I mean, I'm addicted to food. I can't go without food. So,
right.
And it's like, well, if you're going to treat watching porn, or if you're going to treat having sex like it's a problem, you have to first understand there's steps that lead into it becoming a problem.
Right.
And you can't just be like, well, stop having sex. You have to take a step back and kind of evaluate what leads people to the point where they're watching porn for 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, oh my God, that just reminded me of something. So that first school, this is another great example of just the insane degrees of hypocrisy involved. There was this guy, he was a gospel singer, and he was like, everyone was like, oh, crazy for him. He's this great gospel singer. He liked to preach too, so he's really hitting all the notes here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I remember there was a little bit of a scandal involving him. So at one point they were trying to do this thing, like a secrets page where people would be able to anonymously post all of their secrets and bear them out to the rest of the school without it coming back on them.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a way to kind of confess to things that were going on, even if it wasn't a bad thing, just something that you felt like you had to get off your chest. So this guy would then go on to different blog articles with these confessions and tell people, especially on the ones where they were talking about struggles with same-sex attraction, to come talk to him about it, because he knew people and he knew things to help. And so what he was doing was he was coercing them into having sex with him. And this is all while he is performing on like a gospel circuit and preaching these viciously homophobic sermons at all his events.
Mm-hmm.
And years later, long after I knew that he was doing this, I go in the gift shop at the school, and wouldn't you know, they've got an entire rack of his albums sitting there. I'm just like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm not saying this right now.
Yeah.
Like, what? And it was even more insane on account of the fact that this particular school was the alma mater for a guy who a few years ago won Dove Awards.
Right.
Basically the Christian music Grammys. And I'm like, y'all aren't going to have his music up here, but you're going to have the rapist's music up here. I'm like, all right, I see how it is.
Right. Yeah, and I think so. I loved what we were talking about earlier about when you made me have this realization about the evangelicalism just sort of being like the clothes that you wear to to fuck the person you want to fuck. Like it's a very specific thing. My immediate question that I had about it before that was like, if they're doing these things in back rooms, it's like, why not just say that you don't believe it? Why not just sort of go and be a happy atheist who doesn't tell anybody what else, what they should be doing while you're doing something else. But the problem with that is that you're not going to attract the people that you're not going to be in the club if you do that. And they like the club.
There's a scene, I don't remember which episode it was, but a scene in The Office where Michael, Jim, and Andy are standing in the conference room, and they've all got, finger guns all pointed at each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is. I mean, that's how it looks to me now. It looks so comical. They're like, we're all going to kill each other, but all we got is finger guns, and we can't really do anything.
Yeah.
But that's why nobody is willing to admit that they aren't, you can't be the first one to say, I don't actually believe this.
Mm-hmm.
I just become part of this culture to, be with the in people,
right.
the cool kids.
Right.
So, in reality, there's not actually any real implications aside from potential social implications for being the first one to be like, I don't actually believe this stuff. And if everyone just admitted to it all at once, then there would not be any social implications for obvious reasons.
Right.
But you don't want to be the first one, that first idiot, to be like, oh yeah, I don't believe in this anymore.
Yeah.
and lose all your street cred with all of your OG friends.
Right.
And I get that, I'm part of the problem, I guess, by not just, going on Facebook and being like, hey guys, I'm an atheist now. At the same time, I'm like, would that be productive? Would that really accomplish anything? And to me, I think part of the coming out moment, now as someone who is at least sufficiently independent that even if my parents cut me off, I could deal with it.
Right.
It's just that I don't feel that I had developed the maturity that's needed to come out publicly to everyone in a way that is productive and might cause people to think for a moment rather than just banging out some angry message on a keyboard. And just because of who I am, I don't want to be that guy who, even though I do have an occasionally inflammatory personality, I don't want to be that guy who's just like, oh yeah, I'm an atheist. Screw all you guys. You're all dumb. You all made me feel sad. On the one hand, I do have those feelings, and they are honest feelings. But on the other hand, I'm just like, what is that really going to accomplish?
Right.
I mean, aside from making everyone mad.
Right.
If all I do is make everyone I've ever known who is still evangelical mad, then, you know, I mean, I guess I get to feel good about myself at the end of the day. But did I do anything that mattered? Did I do something that made someone think? And I don't think that would be the outcome. I don't think it would make anyone really think about who they are, what they believe. And if I'm not going to do that, then I'd rather just keep my mouth shut.
Well, you know, one thing that might come from this show, I mean, I don't have, you know, a God complex. I don't think this is gonna like start some movement or anything like that. But, you know, I mean, there have been people that have told me things on here that they haven't told their peers or their parents, you know? Your perspective about this might be one that helps if somebody actually does listen to this. Like there might be, and there have been people listening to this. I just don't picture there being many evangelicals that would listen to this. Only people who have actually left. But like if there is somebody who is still identifying as evangelical, but only publicly, you know, they might hear this and be like, oh shit, I'm not alone. You know, there are other people that have seen the same things that I've seen, and I don't care if I'm in the club anymore.
Seeing the things that I've seen kind of reminds me of one other thing that I've noticed, and that is, for some reason in the last couple of years, there's been this big uptick in people who are suddenly super obsessed with leadership authority figures abusing children. And, you know, there's a case involving the Jehovah's Witnesses and how they're spending all kinds of money in fines for contempt of court for not releasing their records on child abuse within Jehovah's Witnesses. But, you know, really, I think people would be pretty shocked if they found out how much child abuse was going on in, like, Protestant evangelical churches. They've gotten away from the scrutiny because there just aren't enough high-profile cases. You know, there's not a situation where it's like, well, really it goes back to the fact that Protestantism is so much more confederated than Catholicism is, or the Orthodoxy, where, you know, there's the head church, and then there's the Pope or the Archbishop, and then there's the bishops beneath him and the cardinals and all of that kind of thing going on. A lot of Protestant denominations don't have that. And so there's not an opportunity for an explosive story where, you know, sanctuary or some church where there's, you know, 20 different pastors and they're all molesting children can actually occur. It all keeps itself very contained, and it keeps the fire from spreading too much. But it's just as widespread. And it's just because there's not an indictment with 25 names on it when it happens, like there is with the Catholic Church, or there is with an Orthodox Church. But the child abuse issue, because I know it from talking to my peers who have been willing to discuss their own experiences with it. And I know that my ex-girlfriend had her own experiences with it. I know of a number of missionary kids who've had experiences with it, and it wasn't their parents in every case. In fact, in most cases, it was not their parents. It was someone else who their parents trusted. Yeah. And it's just as widespread. It's just as rampant. It's just as big a problem. And if you think, well, there's nothing like that, you know, you look at what's going on in Pennsylvania, for example, and think that's not going on in my town, it probably is. And you just don't know about it.
Yeah, I had a feeling that it wasn't isolated to Catholicism, but you're right that, you know, you just don't hear about it.
Yeah, and again, it's like I said, you know, it's so much easier to contain when it's one church with one head pastor and everyone else is a subordinate. And typically, it's one of the subordinates who's doing it. It's usually not the head pastor. Yeah. And so then the head pastor just squashes it, makes it go away. Now it's not a big problem anymore.
Yeah.
the only kind of situation where it has the potential to kind of explode is something like what happened a couple years ago when there was this flood of accusations against a handful of professors there of sexual impropriety with students.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I say sexual impropriety. Sexual assault is going a little further than impropriety.
Definitely.
It was such a mess. They handled it so badly. They had no clue what they were doing. They brought in these investigators who were kind of tangentially involved with the school, and of course, naturally they cleared everyone, and the students were like, "It's not that simple."
Right.
And so then they brought in this other group. It's some kind of it's a religious group. They're a Christian group, and they focus on a real, legitimate investigation of sexual assault or sexual molestation accusations within a religious group.
Mm-hmm.
And they came in and they were like, "Yeah, you got to make some big changes around here because this is going to keep happening if you don't." And then the school kicked them out and said, "You can't look at anything anymore." And then the students complained again and were like, "Hey, it's not like these guys are Satanists or something. Come on."
Right.
And so finally they had to let them just go over, and they released this report, which the school kept under seal because it wasn't a legal proceeding. But from people who talked to local media about the report said, yeah, it's way worse than people thought it was. It was just completely out of control. I mean, they were talking about, 30, 40% of the male professors there were involved in molesting students. And it was very much out of control.
Yeah.
And the school was forced to make some pretty big changes, from what I understand. I don't know how well they've succeeded in fixing the problem, but the student body and the Alumni Association were pretty upset, which is kind of funny because, the Alumni Association is chock full of atheists. So that was kind of an awkward aspect of it. Actually, I worked with a guy he was a great guy, kind of an old school hippie in a lot of ways. And he went to, and he actually, he gave me a really interesting thought. He was talking about the difference between God and Santa Claus. And he said, people like to use this kind of analogy to, he said, they just like to use it to piss people off. But I'm not trying to piss anybody off. I'm just saying. He said, they say that God gives you your morality. Your parents raised you telling you God gave you your sense of morality, your sense of right and wrong. And he said, but it was your parents who gave you that.
Mm-hmm.
God didn't come down from heaven and zap you with the knowledge of good and evil. He said, and it's the same thing as with Santa Claus. They tell you for years that Santa Claus brings you the presents every Christmas. He's like, but it was your parents the whole time.
Right. Your
parents brought you the presents. Your parents brought you your sense of right and wrong. He said, I've met so many Christians who had no sense of right or wrong. Did God just, he said, did God just fuck up and forget to give them their sense of right and wrong? Or did they just get it from awful parents?
Right.
He said, if I'm going to be religious, I'm going to be inclined to think that God doesn't fuck up. So it couldn't be that God didn't give them their sense of morality. He just forgot that day.
Right.
It's more likely that they just got a bad sense of morality from their parents. And he's like, it's just the same thing. Yep. You get your sense of morality from your parents, not from God.
I can understand the mentality of claiming you are something to fit in, if you're young and in a school setting. But after Neil and I spoke, I began to wonder why that mentality would endure after getting out of such a social environment. I'm not saying every evangelical is faking it, but the ones who are would only do so if either they're terrified to let go of it or there's something in the United States culture that rewards them for it, like how going to an Ivy League school or being in a certain fraternity or sorority may cast you in a better light to employers. Is there just something I'm missing by having renounced my faith? I don't know. But secular views have grown in the United States, so I'm not alone. According to a Gallup poll from 2017, 51% of people polled claimed that religion was, quote, very important in their lives, and 38% identified as Protestant. That's down from 1997, when 60% said that religion was very important in their lives, and 53% identified as Protestant. Also, in 1997, only 12% of those polled answered that religion was, quote, not very important in their lives. In 2017, that number was 25%. Finally, in 1997, 9% of those polled answered that their religion preference was none. In 2017, they've increased to 20%. I'll put the link to this Gallup poll in the episode description, along with a link to the Pew Research study that Neil was talking about. I chose to only talk about the Gallup poll because it's more recent, but feel free to check both. There's information in both studies about other religious groups as well. If there's anyone listening that has left a religion for Christianity, I want you to know that I welcome a conversation with you and will gladly publish it. I fully acknowledge that by hosting a show dedicated to people who have left religions, many of the stories I hear will be about their worst examples, which may be more isolated than any of us heathens realize. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and share it with someone you trust. For immediate updates and discussions, follow the show on Twitter @OutfoldPodcast. Special thanks to Neil for approving all of this conversation being shared. Logo and artwork by my wife. Production by my wife and I. All music by me. Have a happy new year. We'll be back again in January. This has been Out of the Fold.